Hey, this is Alfredo Lozano, and this is the first group programming assignment. I chose to do this on my own, simply just because out of time constraints, and we're just going to go through this real quick. Okay, so we have our libraries, the request, import, text wrap, pandas, matplotlib, numpy, text blob, word cloud, and the PIL image, which is kind of a extra thing I did with this one. Beautiful soup to parse and extract text, I believe. Text wrap to, to make sure it's properly wrapped, and then word cloud and text blob. We'll go through that later. We have our URL here. We have our header to bypass the bot security, so we don't have a rejection. And then have a status code here to basically show that we downloaded everything successfully and we got a good return response. That way we're just not left hanging. And then what we're going to do is kind of in a way like downloading, but we're going to parse everything and then have a response here to make sure that just kind of get some feedback, say, hey, everything worked out okay. And so now that we have kind of like a copy of everything, we can start utilizing everything. We can start extracting the first header, which is generally the title, and then printing it out into once we store it into a variable. So this is going to be actually the Wikipedia website regarding back in the old days, which is an awesome game, which is Star Fox 64 um, on the Nintendo 64, and how this reviewer. We're just going to extract some text from this reviewer specifically. And then what we got going on here is that we stored and printed out the title. We have, this was actually a little bit different, but because even though the paragraphs were stored and we got the first one, I actually got an error initially because I only got one of two paragraphs. And this was a little bit more difficult because there really was no, per se, declared intro header. So I had to really dig in there and try to figure out how I was going to do a custom job on this, which was really difficult. And then, so this was kind of the first thing that seemed to help in general right here. Declaring this was able to help me find that first paragraph, but it had to iterate through, and that's where it got kind of very difficult. And that's where the for statement went through. It was very difficult to kind of understand, and I had to kind of just dig in there to kind of get everything stored, basically wrap it, join it together, I believe. But this statement here was what helped the most. So what we actually had going on here is, so what we got going on here is that we're actually grabbing all the paragraphs until I think it reaches the next header. And then this was actually a little bit tricky with further other sections regarding the rubric, which was to help us find the history section. There was no history section. So I chose the story section instead with the header. But then it got kind of tricky because instead of the H2, they used H3s. So I think they did some custom formatting on the Wikipedia website, which was a little bit difficult. But this one grabbed both of them. It iterates through and grabs all of them until I think it reaches the next header officially. So it makes sure it stores it and grabs all the paragraphs. And then here is where it joins them all in together and then wraps it so it gets it kind of a little bit neater. But I think if I go through here, it needs a little bit more help here. So, but we got all of the intro paragraphs. This is where the story section, this is what was really difficult here, was that there was not all the same. I had to go and customize it so it wasn't just looking for the standard H2 statement that we had in the examples. I had to go for H2, H3, and H4 headers. And yeah, it was a little bit messy and when I analyzed the website, that's when it got a little bit tricky in general. Um, but because with HTML, I had to go in and actually look for the ID, which was story, and then set it to a variable. And it was like if, ID, then start processing it. I initially tried with H3 and it didn't work and it just got real messy. But having it iterate, between H2 and H3 and I think even H4, this is where we started actually grabbing all those paragraphs in the story section. And then what we were able to do was actually start putting them together in the append here. So the token and the P, this was really difficult. I think I spent a couple hours trying to unravel this. And I know web development I've never done it before, but I heard it can get a little bit messy sometimes. And this is where we had our text wrapping. And it seemed like the magical number for this, at least this format right here, was about 150. So in width. And then, of course, if we didn't find the ID number of a story, which that was a whole thing where I had to change this as well. I think it was another type of syntax where it did include the ID, but I think it had a span in there or something like that. And then I had to look it up, and then it just said because it's HTML, it just requires story. But if it didn't find that, then it would just print this out. So I kept getting this for a while, and after a while, I'm like, gotta do something about that. It's not working. Okay, so next, we're going to go through the main content extraction. This is where I had to utilize H3, and I think this was correct. But this is where we start getting into the vehicles, the multiplayer, the characters, and the stories. Well, the story of the section. So I think this is the main content. And I think it's going basically into for each section of the sections, grab all the paragraphs if the content tag is correct. Or the same, I should say. And then it starts printing it out into each section, so the title and the content. So probably could have just gotten rid of this, but I like it. All right. And then I just wanted to make sure I was looking for this was something just for development, but I was grabbing all the section headings because I was trying to check my work. And so I actually went and created a, I guess I always like to call these array. I know that some other languages call it different things. Um, but I wanted to store them all because I was really looking for this one in general, and I was trying to find out what the key was to detect up here that ID, and I finally found it eventually. For I think it was up here. So that's the reason why I printed them out, and I kept it up to 20 because it seemed like if I started going to like 12, then I know the rules of arrays in general. Like this is the first one, but yet it's 0. Started getting some weird jumping around in numbers. Like if it was 12, it jumped to 10. I'm like, I'm gonna keep it at 20 to make sure. So then we got our references, and just using beautiful soup, you find them all, and you start going and grabbing the external links one by one. And this is very powerful. But all the links that I didn't know there was this many. I just couldn't believe it. All right, and then this is, even though I printed the head, it's extracting all the paragraphs, and that was, I think, the start of getting the sentiment processing. And I think I kept the length greater than 50. I almost didn't put that in there, but I heard that it helps to keep it, make sure it's greater than 50. So grabbing all the text one by one. And so I think we even did the amount of paragraphs too. Just kept everything kind of short with the only printing the head of things. And then with this one, which was in the examples we had, which was printing the character count and word count and some of the beginnings of each paragraph. And I think with pandas, I think it is. I think that was pandas. I think a part of pandas because this between I know 0 is the first one, but that seemed to be something where it it was helpful, but I'll show you later. It was kind of like I had to get rid of these for something later on in this assignment. Um, but then going in here, just counting all the averages. So the word count, the shortest and the longest. So we have the average, shortest, and longest of every one here. So utilizing the data frame that we have, and then getting the mean, min, and max, and then printing it out in the statement. This is where I kind of had to change. I know our example said here for the sentiment analysis. Initially, I tried to do 0. And this is where aesthetically, I don't know if I'm correct or not, but I did look up some things and it said that try 0.05 because initially when I had set this to 0 here, I only got positive and negative. And it seemed very black and white, cut and dry, and it didn't feel critical enough of getting positive negative, and neutral sentiment. So I increased it to 0.05 on both sides of the range, and this is where I started getting a bit of a change here. It just seemed a little bit more critical, and it seemed like it felt a little bit better, but I don't know if it was a little bit too much. So we're basically going through the data frame and grabbing the paragraphs and then applying and getting the sentiment, polarity, subjectivity. And then at the end, I think story, I guess you would call this a table. So we have our, I believe, our headers, the start of the paragraphs in the very beginning, and then the polarity. So I think we did talk about some things here where the numbers meant certain things, where if it was like almost neutral, like positive, I think it was. That's when we, you can't always take this for granted. It's positive, like, oh, it's black and white. Um, and I think that's why I kind of wanted to do the 0.05 on both scales, on both sides, because it just felt like something feels weird, like it just, I was getting too many on either or. So, so we have here, then we do our counts are positive, negative, and neutral with value counts, and then I chose to display based the bar graph because before it was just super high on positive and when I had zeros, and then like negative. It was like right here, and then up here it was like this feels really weird. It was like all this here was up here, so I needed to change that. It just felt really bad. Like a zero was just, it just didn't feel like it was enough, but I could be wrong, of course. And then this one right here was basically sorting everything and grabbing the polarity, I think. And I think this was the most positive paragraph. And I think it was at 0.61. So that it was just, that's supposedly the great, like you can see it right here, the greatest game. And this was a great game. So I mean, the numbers kind of registered, and it's amazing how it can detect that. Okay, and then I chose to do a word count. I think we had some examples here. I just wanted to explore this even more, but grabbing every one of the paragraphs and establishing a word count. Um, Now I know we have 31 here, and what are the algorithm on the length of greater than 50 had registered this only at 31? I don't know, but it's kind of cool that we can, quickly, gather the word counts here. So this part wasn't necessary, but I don't think it was necessary, but I chose to do a word cloud. And it's grabbing all the text, and I think the most mentions of all the words in the Wikipedia page. And I think it's basically joining all the paragraphs together and then stripping everything down and putting it into, I believe, a figure with a background of white. And then we're going to basically generate a word cloud. And then we get this. So this is pretty cool. And it's interesting what words were mostly mentioned. I mean, it was like, I mean, it's right there. It's game. So that's interesting. This was kind of a big game in my life with my dad because we would play this game a lot on the weekends. So I wanted to do one more thing because it felt like, a little customization. So this is where it gets a little bit customized here. So I chose to do, this is actually the Star Fox team logo in the game and throughout the genre or series. So this is, how this is the team's logo. So I chose to do a word cloud on this and outline it and put everything in a red. So something I did here, and basically using a lambda function for every word to be read, I believe. Establishing a word count because it was interesting how this looks great, but when you're trying to fit it into here, if you don't have enough words, it starts looking weird. So I bumped the word count to go higher and then ended up doing a contour shape, which was here, which was red. So the contour line. So it's almost like the same one here, but it's a little bit different. But the thing that helped out the most, which was the mask image, and that was an image that, which was here, as you see here. The white will actually go in and be like a subtraction, and the red will be only utilized. So just something I wanted to do. And that's how we got this. And then the last part I did was I wanted to make an array of all the characters in this particular game and extract the text and soup. And I just said, hey, like let's try to put everything in. I think this is a lowercase and joining them all together and start counting. How many times in this was counted? So we have the characters and dimensions here in a data frame. And because it's not going up, we're going to just go down. And I was rather surprised. And I know that in like stories, we would think that the protagonist is often like, the most important character in the series, but often, no, it's not. It's kind of true. I mean, this is a Wikipedia webpage, but it was just something like, yeah, it was interesting. And the main character is at 4 and the bad guy is at 19. That's interesting. And then plotting them into a bar graph. And yeah, just by far. So that's this project here. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.